Guys, so just a quick introductory into dosing, or at least what I do with my tank, and kind of an explanation. I'm not a chemist, so don't hold anything against me, or with, I recommend that you still read the instructions on yours, because I am still a novice when it comes to dosing, and I'm learning daily with the different steps that I should be taking to dose my tank to help supplement the natural ecosystem in here and support the coral that I grow in my tank. And dosing is pretty much strictly based off of what you do with your tank, what your levels are, and it's not an all-around universal thing. So again, when you're dosing yours, these are just tips that I do with mine. You should always, read your instructions. Each dosing kit is different. Each dosing kit has different recommendations. Do what is based off of your tank. In my tank, I use the Red Sea Color Pro, and I'm not supporting that or advertising for them in any way, but it's just one that I found that works. In Red Sea Color Pro, when you're dosing your tank, it's based off of your base elements. Base elements are natural elements found in the water. They're the most common ones that we test for. They do branch off into other elements, but the base ones that we're looking at are the high-end ones that you're going to be testing regularly for. For example, with Red Sea Color Pro, we're testing for iron, iodine, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. These are what I call the base elements in this test kit, and based off of how I dose is based off what I get on those readings. Now, they also, in my dosing kit, even though those are the primary elements that we're dosing for, they have supplementary elements too. For example, strontium, molybdenum, iodine, iodide, which is another type of iodine, strontium. There's a lot, nickels, coppers. These are all little things that are involved in the different families that we're dosing for. Even though we're not testing for them, they're branches of the different elements that we're testing for and dosing for. So with Red Sea, the primary element that we are testing for, or at least the method that they give for dosing, is to base it off of your calcium consumption in your tank. You can do it this way, or you can test for the individual base elements, potassium, iron, iodide, and so on. Then if one of those elements is low, then obviously you would dose the needed supplement. So in this kit, you have A, B, C through D, and each one of the different letters doses for a different base element. So if you can see right here, B, which is the second one in from the left, says potassium on the label. The next one over says iron. So if you're getting a low reading on your iron levels, then you would add C. B for potassium. Those are your examples. But if you're basing it off of calcium, which is not the method that I use, but it's one of the Red Sea preferred, it's based off calcium consumption. And calcium consumption in your tank is variable, so it's not an exact science, but this is kind of how I figured it out so far. So if you do a base test of your tank on day one, let's say day one is Monday for this example, and your calcium level without adding any supplement was 350 parts per million. So you dose that calcium to try to get it up to 650, because let's just say that's where you want your tank to be. I'm not saying that's what you want yours, but for me, in this example, 650. So we dosed it to 650, we tested it, we found out that yes, indeed, it was 650, or roughly approximate 650. Now, we waited 3 days and we tested again, and we found out that it declined now to 500. Okay, so we know that we're losing calcium at that rate over 3 days, so it's 150 parts per million. It went down in 3 days. Then we finally test again on day 6, and we now find out that it is, let's just say, 375. So we went from 550 to 375. So we lost another 125 parts per million. Altogether, we lost 275 parts per million over 6 days. Now, I'm using 6 days because I'm counting the 7th day in the week as a day for dosing, where the levels in the tank are adjusting and are not good to use as a strict let's just say, I can't think of the word, but it's just say it's a day that you can't use because it's not balanced out. And in our test, we want a day where we know that these levels are stable. So over these 6 days, if you did 275 parts per million divided by 6, that number that you would get is your average calcium consumption per day in a 6-day week. So with that number, you would then look at the scale on the Coral Sea kit and figure out how much you would need to dose of each. I think roughly what it comes out to is it is 1 milliliter per 25 gallons of water equals 1 part per million of each. So it would do that math and then use the scale that Red Sea gives you and dose per that. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's a very complex way of doing it. And I guess if you're dosing overall, that is a base way of doing it. I think that also has to factor in whether or not you're using an automatic doser. But again, that's just the basic math. I usually dose these about every 3 days, and I do about 1 milliliter at a time. And that's just me. I don't really do as much testing. I test about once every week just to make sure that my levels in the tank are good. Red Sea also does provide in their program a list of symptoms that you can get from overdosing certain elements. And it basically describes the different things that you'll see in your tank that will help you pinpoint that you're overdosed in a certain element. One of the prime examples would be algae growth. So by adding nutrients into your water, let's just say you did this without testing and you decided, hey, I'm just going to add a bunch of this stuff, you might get things like algae blooms. For example, here we have this green algae on the rock. Now, it's not hair algae, it's just a type of green algae. It's sticking primarily to this rock, and I don't find it as a nuisance, but it got a little bit more significant when I started adding these elements to the water. Because of the excess nutrients in the water, it gave seed to better algae growth. This is just one type of algae in my tank. On the rock back there, you see that pink, that's coralline. I have it growing on others. For a while there, I had this kind of red slime looking algae. You can kind of see some in the back, but I believe that's coralline there. The red slime algae kind of disappeared. It wasn't a nuisance. It didn't hurt anything in the tank or kill anything. Just kind of grew right there on the rock. And then I got a little bit of red on the glass. That would be cyanoalgae. That grew also from the excess nutrients in the water column. So again, these are just symptoms of excess nutrients in the water column. Other things are listed there too, like decline in coral growth, change in the coloration. Not necessarily meaning that it's bad. The coloration change could just be based off of the nutrients that the coral is feeding on at that time and having an excess of. But it gives you a list of things to look for so you can tell the difference in what's growing too much. That's about it because now my kid's here.